You are listening to Strange Passenger, a single from the upcoming Glitch Hikers The Spaces Between. If you want to listen to it in its full extent, you can find it at the end of tonight's show. Hello, my name is Walker, this is Starlight Car, and together with my co-host Solon, we bring you a very special and insightful interview with the two creative leads of the original Glitch Hikers First Drive and Glitch Hikers The Spaces Between, Lucas W. Johnson and Clarice Siren. Tonight we'll talk about everything from architecture and game design to how we interpret stories, working in a pandemic environment, how to navigate difficult subjects in writing, and so much more. Enjoy the show.
Hello everyone, welcome to a special edition of the Starlight Car, our podcast at thevideogamechoochoo.com, where we get to interview special guests. And tonight, I've got an extremely special set of folks that I'm getting to hang out with tonight. I'm really honored. I am with, of course, I've got my co-host here, Walker. Say hey, Walker. Walker.
Hello.
That's Walker. Y'all know him from the Video Game Choo Choo website. Usually you're on the editing side, but today you're going to be front and center. But with me, I have, from Silver String Media, I have Lucas and Clarice both here.
Hello.
Hey, Solon.
How you doing?
Lovely to be here. Thank you so much for having us.
Yes, thanks for having us.
I'm really glad to have you. See, a lot of these times I get to have guests on, and it's really fun. I don't know them very well, and I get to meet them and learn a lot about them.
We go back quite a ways.
We actually go back a ways. I've gotten to see a lot, but I don't want to put the cart before the horse here. If for folks who don't know, Silver String Media is putting together a little game called Glitch Hikers. Space between. Wait, no, it's not space. It is The
Spaces Between.
Thank you. See, Walker's the professional around here. I'm just hamming it up. We're going to talk about a lot of liminal spaces tonight, but Glitch Hikers: The Spaces Between is a run-up of 2014's Glitch Hikers, now called Glitch Hikers First Drive, which, if you haven't played, the demo's on silverstring.itch.io, and I highly recommend it. This is an extremely great experience, and it's 20 minutes long, actually, you should spend 40 minutes with it. You should spend an hour with it. You should spend a lot of time in a car moving. It's just really relaxing. And in the interim, for the last 7 years between the first Glitch Hikers release and now, Silver String Media has been putting on a whole showcase, a slew of what some might call where is it? What some might call like a consultancy of sorts, but I would say are project makers, shakers, and builders. Just the number of projects that y'all have put together at this point is staggering. Between the stuff that you've done since Glitch Hikers, especially Book of the Dead was something I was a huge fan of. That
takes me back.
Right? Flow Weaver, and but then also the work that you did putting together things for Wandersong, for Celeste, and for one of our favorites around here, Manifold Garden.
Yes, we... Interrupt.
No, go for it.
No, those were great projects that we got to have a small hand in, some consulting, a little writing, that kind of stuff. Very honored to be part of such amazing projects.
What the real pleasure has been, while we're putting together kind of larger projects, as you say, like Flow Weaver, VR multi-dimensional room escape game, or Glitch Hiker Spaces Between. We are, also honored to be able to offer some small narrative design consulting, or in the case of something like Manifold Garden, a little bit of architectural consulting, which was very fun for me because I always love chatting about architecture. It's really a pleasure to be able to touch on so many great games, and they're already great before we get even kind of brought into it, but to be able to contribute a little bit, help polish things up, it's a real pleasure, and it's definitely work we hope to continue doing.
Well, you've also done bigger projects. You did an entire Neverwinter Nights module too, with Dark Dreams of Furie.
Yes, yeah, that was a very interesting and very fun project for sure. It sort of came out of nowhere, but we were super thrilled to be able to put that together.
Oh yeah, just building legacy type projects out of it's awesome. It's cool to see.
Well, thank you.
I'm a big old fan, but that's neither here nor there. I want to dig a lot tonight, and I know Walker does too, into what it's like building Glitch Hikers. Because Glitch Hikers is it's a space, it's a space that you are in, and the biggest part for me is that space consists of like 500 different parts. It's sounds, it's audio, it's spoken text, it's what you're seeing at any given time. It's the framing of shots that are going by either in a car or now in this new one in a train, in other places. Like, putting these spaces together is extremely specific. And so, Walker, could you just ask your first question here? Because I think it's a good way to get people into the mindset of Glitch Hikers.
Okay, yeah. Well, first of all, I actually wanted to thank you both to agree come talk to us, because someone mentioned you guys go way back, and I'm actually in a way like here thanks to Glitch Hikers, because it was one of the first games that I found that I thought to be like so unique that I thought I would like to help people find games like this and like try to look at them more from a like more thoughtful perspective, because games this unique usually get regarded more as like product stuff, and I think that's kind of a disservice when you're making like something really experimental and unique like Glitch Hikers. So yeah, it's a really big honor for me to be talking to you guys, continuing the project in a way.
Yeah, thank you so much.
That's so sweet. Thank you so much. I'm really happy to hear that.
And I wanted you guys, if you could tell us more or less like what is the main idea behind like the new one. You've mentioned like it is like a liminal space sort of thing, but exactly what is that you are trying to build in like this new project? What is like the main aim?
Lucas, would you like to give the quick rundown?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, in the original Glitch Hikers, as Solon mentioned, now rebranded as Glitch Hikers First Drive, it was all about trying to create the experience of driving alone on a highway late at night, and sort of all that entailed, from sort of weird music playing on, NPR or whatever, to conversations being about the kinds of things that like your late night mind wanders to when it's 2 a.m. and you're alone on the highway. And with the new project, we wanted to just expand that concept to more areas, expand the amount of content that there was in conversations and music, but also explore other kinds of journeys. One of my favorite things that sort of led to the Spaces Between was when we first released First Drive. We'd sort of pitch it to people and say, okay, that feeling when you're alone on the highway late at night, just driving and your mind is wandering? And, 80% of the people we would talk to would say, yeah, totally. And I'd say, that's what the game that we're making, it's all about that. And they'd be like, oh, cool. And then the other 20% would say like, oh, I don't drive. And I'd be like, oh, well, anyway, you get it. And so one of the things that, we were thinking about is, especially outside of North America, which is such a, car-centric culture, a lot of other places aren't. Europe certainly isn't, but, people have a lot of train rides, and we're like, oh, like, what if we could do like, Glitch Hikers train journey or something, and do the same kind of things, like, a long cross-country overnight train ride has a lot of similarities with that sort of late night drive, potentially. Certainly from sort of a structural point of view, from a metaphorical point of view of the, going on this journey, being in this liminal space between destinations. And so that was sort of the seed that became the Spaces Between. It was one of those things that we were always like, we could revisit this. There is more we can do with this idea. And that's sort of what it grew out of.
It's really interesting because You know, it's really exciting because as much as the original game felt super experimental, and by the original game I mean the first Drive, felt very experimental, it's still something that feels very much like we're raw and experimenting with new ideas in the spaces between. And to be able to both extend what we already know worked and to push it further and to expand its kind of reach and kind of the accessibility of it. And we'll get probably more into some of the other ways we've expanded the accessibility of the experience. But to be able to do that while also kind of coming at the same question, but from entirely different angles of like this liminal space that's both common and familiar and mundane and also magical and potentially transformative, finding and kind of exploring the magic of everyday mundane spaces that we pass through all the time. And yeah, like I think that it's been a real pleasure to continue this conversation and to see how this conversation has evolved over the last 7 years. I mean, I certainly didn't think that, 7 years after the first Drive, people would be kind of like, yeah, of course, we get it. Like, it's not only a game about driving alone late at night and, it's got limited interactivity, but that doesn't mean it's not a game, but also it's a space, as you kind of led off with. I think the fact that people are approaching games from that vantage point is really exciting to me, because it's something that I've always approached games from that standpoint, that interest in them as spaces, and players thinking of them more as inhabitants. And that's definitely another major inspiration of what we're trying to do here, is really regard the people who are going to be coming into these spaces, into these journeys, with a lot of care.
No, that's fascinating. The moment Lucas said that this was about investigating more than just driving spaces, because not everyone has that experience, it makes so much sense. And as I've seen from some demo playthroughs that of the new Glitch Hikers, there's a lot of different spaces, and I guess I want to expand on that, because between all the different spaces that you can interact with, they all kind of construct levels in way more of a conventional sense than Glitch Hikers originally was like. And I want to know how that process gets built in. So to give some clarification, to start this whole thing out, you start in a little hub area, which is a delightful, not liminal, but also kind of liminal space. It's the hub between all of these liminal spaces you're going to be investigating. So in and of itself, it is, kind of some in-betweens. But look, I said at the top of this podcast, we're going to say this word a lot. But you're in between a lot of places. And while, I don't know. Okay, you know what? Let's get to the beat of this. There's a deep irony inside of Glitch Hikers, because you're in liminal spaces or things that are considered liminal spaces, but those, you're investigating them directly. You're not, floating. These are spaces we are usually floating through, like driving a car, riding a train. These are places that we as people usually just close our eyes and stuff happens around us. Or don't close your eyes when you're driving. Oh God. If you're tired, you could pull over. But you're not idly going through these spaces. As Glitch Hikers, you are investigating the space directly, like with a magnifying glass. And so I'm wondering, like, how architecturally do you get this transition between something that's more experimental, like the original Glitch Hikers, where you put the player in the space, they're forced to do it immediately, versus Glitch Hikers, the newest version of things, being a more guided experience?
Well, I definitely want to let Lucas talk a little bit about this some more, but I'll just say that, like, one of the other early ideas we had was this idea of, starting at a convenience store or something like that, playing with these ideas of liminality on multiple levels, leaning into these, as you say, deep ironies. Like, that was definitely something that we were also interested in. And that plus this idea of, okay, we want to expand into the train and do things that are kind of adjacent to what we were originally exploring, but beyond that kind of set up this structure for us to think about, okay, like, what other spokes are there off of this hub? And I think in some ways it kind of naturally lent itself a little bit of that structure as we approach the task.
Yeah, like, I mean, you say the hub being sort of a destination, not so much a liminal space, except insofar as in the game it's between the journeys. But at the same time, a late night convenience store or, roadside stop, which is basically what this is its own kind of liminal space too, right? Like, you can, go to the convenience store as sort of your destination and be in that space, but more often it is part of a transition between things as well. But a big part of what Glitch Hikers is about is not just, investigating the space itself, investigating, what is it like to be on that drive. But it's about liminality in sort of the anthropological sense too, the transition between states, which is really what liminality is. And and what Glitch Hikers is doing is creating this experience for the player, creating this space for them to be in order to have some kind of experience, in order to have some kind of, potentially transitionary experience. The conversations that you have with the hikers that you pick up in the car or meet elsewhere, are there to help sort of guide introspection for the player. And, we hope that at the end of it, you're coming out of that experience, maybe you've learned something new about the world, or maybe you've learned something new about yourself, in how you sort of have interacted with these characters or heard their perspectives and that kind of thing. So that's such a key part of it too. And that's sort of the transitionary element of liminality.
I see. Yeah. No, that gives me a lot to think about, especially with regards to, Claris, you've done a lot of talks, especially at like Ludonarracon and other fellow traveler type events about architecture in narratives. And before I get off of the structure of the levels themselves, how does that architecture change now that you're no longer in a car? Where your interaction points are, listening to the radio and having a passenger, a glitch hiker alongside you that you communicate with. How does that change between the other levels?
I actually would like to add something similar, to this question, because I actually didn't know about this aspect of you designing with architecture in mind, and that became really interesting to me because when I ran my DOM analysis of like the original Glitch Hikers, one of the things that stood out to me is that a highway is like a very anonymous place. Like, yeah, there's mountains and forests, but like you don't really take that into account when you take a long car ride, right? To you, the highway itself is like the only space that exists, and what surrounds you kind of blends together, so I'm actually really interested about how do you integrate architecture into what to most people tends to be just a fungible space that they don't really take into account. To them, what exists is like the lane forward, and the things to the side might as well not be there. So how do you take that and make it a tool for them to inhabit the space that you want them to?
These are all really interesting and good questions. And like, I just want to, again, start by saying like how happy I am. Like, this is really all I ever wanted, was to have these kinds of conversations about the nature of game spaces and like a lot of...
Claris, I've been holding this in for 7 years, dog.
Was not even really a fully formed hope, but it was like the seed of a hope when we were making this game that one day people would be chatting about games like this. And, people aren't just talking about Glitch Hikers like this. I think this is an awareness that's really risen up amongst people who are interested in the form. And I think that's great. So anyway, sorry. To answer the question, like, I think I need to address a couple other, like, deep ironies in this game. Because, like, we've already talked about one, which is, you know, you're in these spaces where are very anonymous, very, you know, fungible, as you say, or very kind of unimportant transitory. And we're, you know, really investing, leaning in, looking inward and looking at and examining these spaces and what they do to us as inhabitants in them. And that's, you know, one interesting, you know, irony is that, you know, we're looking at something that is often overlooked. I think another is that all games are liminal spaces, and all games exist within a magic circle. And so in a lot of ways, a lot of the things that Glitchhikers is doing, all games are also doing. So Glitchhikers is, and always kind of has been, a commentary on games themselves. And I think that that's another irony, is that, like, as much as we're trying to create these spaces that we're really familiar with and get people to really look at what is it like to be in the architecture of, you know, the driver's seat, or, you know, the architecture of a passenger train. What's that like as a space? And what's it like to be an inhabitant in there? You know, these are also not really what's going on. The actual interaction is you are playing a video game. And there's so many layers of abstraction that are going on. And I think, as Lucas said, we want people to look inward too. We want people to use this as a mirror and as an opportunity and a jumping off point to kind of take the plunge and to go, okay, whoa, normally I just kind of glance past all of this layered reality and all of this complicated, multifaceted thinking that I'm not really doing, but it's kind of just relaxing into as I focus on this game. But, like, just take a second to think about this, because this is totally bizarre. And again, that's all surrounding this notion of capturing what the actual experience of being in these spaces is like. So as much as it, like, physically and aesthetically is, you know, the car with the seats, the highway pushing you forward, you know, the experience of that when you're in a flow state is the same experience as being, you know, in a nice flow state of a chill video game, it turns out, and is similar to, you know, a lot of other anonymous liminal space. And there's kind of a similarity across these types of spaces, and that they're all in. One could approach these very wildly different spaces from the same lens. And I think that's something that surprised me, was just like, okay, a recipe for creating this kind of meditative, introspective space is car. I mean, normally architects get all excited and nerdy about, like, oh, cool.
Car.
How can I create, you know, these stirring spaces using geometry and patterns that are juxtaposed, or shapes that are kind of resonating with others. Or you could just take a completely mundane space that people normally don't pay attention to at all and give them nothing but to pay attention to it. That'll do it. That was a very surprising kind of irony.
If all you hear is
for me
tone,
to discover as well.
Yeah. If all you're listening to is tone, suddenly that tone has so much more body to it because all you hear is tone, right?
To jump off what Clarice was saying about the, you know, you're not actually in the car, you're actually sitting at a computer playing a game. And what is that sort of space like? You know, one of my favorite things that we were able to do in the spaces between, because we have so much more room for content, is explore some of those things more too. So, like, First Drive had, you have 3 conversations over the course of a playthrough, but there are 6 possible conversations that you can have. In the spaces between, we have 50 conversations that you can have over the course of the game. And some of them, like, deal very explicitly with some of those questions. I mean, some of them talk about architecture and the building of spaces, because of course they do. Some of them talk about, what's it like to be interacting with a digital space, and are digital spaces as real as physical spaces? Yes, of course. And those kinds of things, is digital real? Can digital things be considered life? All of these things that ultimately are quite, meta conversations in the context of Glitch Hikers. But that's all Glitch Hikers is one big metaphorical whatever.
Uh-huh.
A game, you could call it.
In fact, call it that.
Please, 7 years ago, we were literally begging you. Please call it a game.
This has been very exciting to me because, just like in the answers to different questions, you guys have already been answering a bunch of doubts I had about the original game. One of the things that I had on my list of questions for this interview was about the radio voice. Because I'm not American if it's not obvious from my accent, so I was like, that's a very strange affect. And I hear that in Alan Wake, and I saw this film about a haunted highway recently called Southbound, and it's a very specific tone of a smooth, spooky radio man, and it makes me question, what is that, what is that specific thing that all of these works are referencing? Mm-hmm. And Solon said, and you said earlier, well, it's NPR. And it makes me think about how you said you added the train and the park in a way to make the experience, make an analog of the experience for people who don't drive. And I found that very curious because it is, in a very strange way, a strange space that also feels natural to us, and as a consequence, we don't pay that much attention to it.
Mm-hmm.
One of the metaphors or reference I have for when something is quite strange is like the feeling of waking up at 4 a.m. when you're a child and you start switching through the channels you never watch and you find really strange foreign shows that you have no idea what they are.
Yep.
That gives me a strange sense of unreality, and I wanted to know if you could tell us about this decision. The addition of the terminal in a way lands the game in at least a certain amount of physicality, because you are parting from the initial hub to somewhere. Whereas, in the original Glitch Hikers, you started in the middle of the car drive, and when it ended, you didn't arrive anywhere, it just cut to black, right?
Oh, I arrived
You
somewhere.
are adding a sense of initial physicality to this game that is about examining the spaces in between concrete locations, in a way.
Yeah. Go ahead, Lucas.
Yeah, I mean, to some extent, there's certainly a practical aspect of that, right? We need a way for you to decide where to go next or what journey to embark on when we have more than just the one, right? The original one is just the one. You start the game, you play it, you stop. You can do it again, but you sort of have to start from the beginning. And this, we have, more options and things like that. So we wanted to, in true form, make that its own space. Another space between things, between journeys. Early on, we talked about even having, a lot of our sort of menu options be more diegetic and things. We do have an extensive menu, as it turns out, but that was always sort of it's certainly a thing of convenience. We needed a place to do that, and we wanted to embody it. We didn't want it to just be like, oh, you open up Glitch Hikers and you click on the button that says drive and you start the drive, or you click on the button that says train. We wanted to have it be a space because that's also sort of its own setting and its own experience for people, hanging out at a convenience store, a roadside stop kind of thing. And we have characters there that are now the clerk character especially, who's there to help sort of shepherd you into the journey, give you context for what you're doing. There's some little video gamey elements of, have you met all of the different hikers and stuff that you can do there. So there's a lot going on that was of interest to us. And part of it too was this question of wanting to make it as accessible to as many different people as possible. I think we've done this in a lot of ways in the new game, from various options to help with accessibility and disability questions, content questions. Also tutorialization. And then in the original game, we sort of give you all the controls right up the front and we tell you all the things you need to know. Well, now we have more controls because there's more journeys. But so now we keep the controls on screen at all times. So that if you're not a gamer and you don't know that W goes forward, because why the heck does W make you go forward? We want to make sure that that's there for you to see, so that, people who aren't quote unquote gamers, can come into it as well. And the hub zone allows us to tutorialize a bit more, to have a softer opening into the game, and to make it clear that there's more content, right? If we just threw you into the drive first thing, which is, we actually started this way, you went through the drive once, and then you would end up at the hub, and you could, choose your next journey from there. People would go through the drive and maybe think that that was it, and not wait to see that there's the hub and that there's more things. So we wanted to make sure that, you had this sense of this sort of central area,
Yeah, that was a really interesting surprise because, of course, we expected people to get to the end of the kind of first driving journey of the expanded game, the Spaces Between, and be like, oh, wow, that was great. I hope there's more. Oh, there is more. And be like amazed because, one of the big cries when we made the first drive 7 years ago was, I want more. We want, it to go longer. Mm-hmm. And also, what's with all these weird short art games anyway? Don't they know it's $1 per hour? And the idea that people were greeting the same length of experience 7 years later, be like, that was satisfying and complete, and I appreciated it. Thank you very much. That was a good video game. Goodbye. No, there's more. Come back. It's just quite a change. But I also, before we move on, I want to talk a little bit about other ways that the space is kind of intertwined, because we've got this nexus, this starting place, the convenience store. We've also got the hikers that you can meet, sometimes across multiple journeys, seeing them again, it's sometimes in a specific sequence to give them an arc. And so there's connections between journeys in that regard. But there's also connections between journeys, actually architecturally and in terms of level design. We found interesting and fun ways to reference the other spaces and other modes of travel in the game from within other journeys. And I'm really excited for players as they get more hands on the game to discover the ways in which the space is kind of laid out and internally consistent across all of these strange reality bending modes.
Wait.
Oh,
hold on.
What? Huh?
What? You're telling me that all of those places so I'm watching the train sequence, and every couple of stops you hear lovely voiceover tell you which area you're in, and you can hit the space bar and it gives you a big beautiful outwards shot of the entire train as it's in transit. It looks really cool. But you're saying that those are all those intertwine with the other routes that you can take while you're doing glitch hiking?
I'm not gonna say more. It's not like...
Don't say any more. You know what? I've heard too much. I'm just... All right. I'm recognizing what level you're playing at. All right. I'll respect that more.
Yeah.
Now we have something to look out for.
I was just gonna rattle off these accessibility design options are really cool. They're really nice. You can change pretty much everything on screen size and control the sound and music, but then you have all the filters for any kind of narratives that are happening inside. There's tons of different ways you can filter out and exclude specific topics that may be hard to handle for certain folks. Those are all incredible. That's all awesome. But you're telling me that the train is going somewhere?
I mean, the train is always going somewhere. This game is always taking you somewhere, probably.
That's a train at every point is also somewhere. God. See, that's the thing. The difference here on the Starlight car, when you're on this podcast, I don't know, we're not going anywhere. This is great. We're going everywhere and nowhere.
It is funny that they're in a train-themed website interview, right?
I forgot to formally introduce you to the Starlight car as we are in the video game Choo Choo. We're on the train. You have a train level
we do.
In your video game.
We're right at home here on this Choo Choo as well.
It gets... Yep.
Mm-hmm.
We're beyond the caboose on this one. Yes, I mean, speaking of, how do you... this is just an easy baseball question. How do you come up with all these spaces? With you're going through the train car. Folks will see this in the demo when they play it. Some of them train cars ain't cars, are they?
No, we have there's some space bending that happens. I think, one of the things that we wanted to do is make sure that we kept the weird, because that's part of what made First Drive, I think, interesting, and what it was doing is like, you're not just driving around late at night and then you pick up a hitchhiker and have a conversation. The hitchhiker teleports into their car and then teleports away again, and there's this question of like, was that real? Like, did that actually happen? Mm-hmm. We sort of set up this thing of like, is this whole game a dream? Is it a hallucination? Is it, what is it? And we never answer that question. There's no canonical answer to that question, quote unquote canonical. And we wanted to sort of keep a lot of that elements. And then, some of the characters that you pick up are aliens or ghosts or something. And so again, this question of like, is this actually happening? And you can even ask them, that to some extent, like, I don't believe that this is happening right now. And so we wanted to just definitely keep a sense of that, because it's those things that shake you out of the expected. It shakes you out of reality and opens you to new ideas, new experiences, opens you to like, okay, well, I have no idea what to expect now, so bring it on. And so, we have some of that in all of the journeys. And so, the train is certainly one where, we do some space bending and stuff like that. And again, doing something that we did with the original that we're very much doing, like way more so with this one, I think, is this idea of, divination essentially within the game, as sort of secular divination, and I'm sure Claire can talk about this more, but this idea that we are creating a space for you to draw meaning, like any tarot reading or something. It's it's randomized elements from which you can draw meaning, and so we have, what hikers do you pick up and what are their conversations about? But we also have, what is the environment like around you? And we're introducing more of those kinds of things. So like, you're walking through the train and suddenly you're in the middle of a city and then you're back on the train. What does that, what does that make you feel? What does that do to your experience of this particular space? And same with the train stops, as you mentioned. The conductor comes on and announces some train stop, like Weeping Falls. We were doing a playthrough the other day, and we were, the player was in the middle of a conversation that was quite emotional, quite sad at times. And then, the train stop comes up, that they're coming up to Weeping Falls. And it was like this really poignant little moment created through largely randomness, but creating meaning out of that is all about what Glitch Hikers is.
That's type of divination.
The biggest game mechanic in the First Drive was apophenia, which is the human brain's capacity to find patterns and meanings in random noise and meaningless patterns, and like really pushing that forward and finding new ways to layer that so that so many things are moving. Definitely in the First Drive, as well as in the space between, a lot of the decisions and actions that the player makes have direct impacts. In some cases, directly like impacting and changing the music. But for every direct, ripple that's through your motion or your interactions, there's a ton of other cascading wind and noise and randomness and decks being shuffled and kind of redealt all the time. And I think that's how a lot of divinatory tools work, besides just leveraging apophenia, the human ability to read, meaning in the tea leaves, so to speak. It's about having a lot of complexity that's mostly screened from view that occasionally shows itself. And in that way also to kind of approach this from a different standpoint than just kind of divination for people who, that's not their bag. It's also kind of simulating hyperobjects, the way that extremely complex phenomena that we're constantly being faced with, like climate change, they fade in and out of our view. We're aware of them. We see different parts of them, but we can never see the whole. And we struggle to comprehend the whole. But it's essential for us to, because we're moving through a world and a reality full of hyperobjects that are constantly changing things and, interacting with us, and we're interacting with them. And I mean, that's the world we live in. We're making more hyperobjects all the time, as well as confronting some that are ancient, like, the solar system and the laws of physics. But I think that those dynamics, are also being simulated, and to some extent the same kind of soft focus, that the spaces, the gaps that we leave for the player to interpret, was that a ... There was time that's cut out, between that train car and then when you're suddenly in the city, or was there a city inside the train car, or whatever. It's up to the player to decide. They're filling in those gaps. I mean, that's part of the gameplay in a lot of senses. But beyond just asking players to fill that gap, we're also... Oh, nope. Speaking of trains, my train of thought just kind of left the station without me, and I...
Hey, that's okay. I can
sure.
help pick that up for you. You want to come along my train? We got to derail.
No, that's okay. I think that's one of the better answers we've gotten in an interview in the show so far. It
got me thinking, because a lot of your work has that interpretive style to it. All the way, I mean, even Celeste, part of your work was writing Mr. Oshiro, right? The hotel manager.
We just offered consulting on that character. And there was a little bit of writing in there, but I think it was mostly...
It's just funny that that's how it landed, of all places, because that's the most interpretive space in Celeste. You're not climbing the mountain. You're taken away from the mountain in that specific case. But especially in a lot of your other work, there's that idea of divining things from chaos, right? And that's why I think I'm so excited to see it's almost easy. It's not. This is a little reductive. It's easy to throw someone into, strap them into a car and make them ride your funny little chaos rocket and make them interpret stuff. But the ask that you're asking out of a player changes when they're in a train and they have to move and maneuver that space themselves. So how do you get that same effect? Because the original Glitchhikers really hits you hard because it's all happening to you. And there's not really, a way to... Whether you see things or don't see things, they're all happening. Now, in the train, you have more agency. And so I'm wondering how that changes things.
I have a little addition to ask. Is there an option, because I have to assume some people would do that, sometimes I've done that, to just sit in your seat in the train ride and be like an apathetic prick for like the whole 40 minutes?
Yeah, there's a couple things there, right? Like, one is, to directly answer that question, you can just sit in the seat and look out the window.
Aww.
And part of any good train ride is to just sit in the seat and look out the window at the train going past. That's why we have those, like, interesting, locales that you pass in the train, that, you can see. It's not just sort of the same train over and over again. That's right. We've done this before in meetings where somebody is saying either train or terrain, and it sounds exactly the same, so I should be careful. So you can, and we actually have some fun little things where the music will come up a bit more if you are just sort of sitting and looking out the window. Ultimately, you have to choose when the journey ends. Like, there's no timer on it. Even the drive where it's much more structured. There is sort of a designated end to it. If you just sit there with a passenger in your car for a long period of time, you could just sit there for a long period of time. So there's no 30 minutes is up, we're booting you off the train now. You choose when you are sort of done that journey. But to Solon's question about, the movement in the train or having it be different. Once we decided we wanted to do more types of journeys, right? Certainly this idea of not everyone drives, so let's put a train in there. What else can we do? We have a walk as another big one, a walk at a park. We decided that all of them needed to be different. And all of them needed to be different in a lot of ways, but mechanically different as a big part of that. Because the whole idea of constructing a journey, the whole thing that we did with First Drive was making every element of the game trying to recreate that experience of driving alone late at night on the highway, right? You can speed up, you can slow down, you can change lanes. You can't drive off the road, right? It's not like a, GTA or something where you can just go wild, because you don't, right? Like, if you're driving along a highway, you don't just careen off the road at a random place. We don't do that. That's not what that experience is actually like. That's a very video gamey thing to do. And so that, that was very much part of the mechanical decision for First Drive. Give you a little bit of control, but not a lot, because that's that experience. And so when we look at, the train, or we look at the walk, or these other journeys, that was a big part of the consideration. What are the mechanics for this space? What are the mechanics that make sense for this kind of experience that are distinct from the others?
And it comes into play in the conversations you have too, because when you're in a car, conversation is happening alongside you. But when you're in a train, you're having direct conversation. You're having eye contact.
That is a very good point.
Yes.
And so writing for that space, writing for conversation that you're going to have direct eye contact with and have body language for and stuff, that's going to change things in weird ways. And from what I've seen, it seems like those are shorter conversations, but then they loop around. They come back. You have multiple conversations with many people. And you kind of have to like carry those conversations along with you, juxtapose them off each other, and stuff like that.
Well, and that became part of this sort of mechanical question too of, how can we structure these conversations differently for each journey in a way that makes sense for that journey, or furthers the metaphor of that journey, if you will. And so we put a lot of thought into, what are the overall moods of each of these journeys? We have sort of the drive as our starting point. It's sort of this chill, nighttime, weird conversations, etc. Mind wandering. On the train, a train is all about sort of a collective journey. You might not all be going to the same destination, but you're all going in the same direction. And we have, the conductor even talks about that, because we're not subtle. And so the conversations in the train are, each individual conversation is a little bit shorter, but like you say, you end up having multiple conversations with each hiker. Each one gets a little deeper, because the train is about sort of this safe space. We're all here together. We're all here supporting each other. We're all going in the same direction. And so you can get into conversations that are a little bit deeper, a little bit, there's conversations that get into grief and, really personal topics and really personal stories, because we've sort of created it as this safe space, versus the walk in the park, which is all, there's winding paths through the park, and you have to stay on the path, but there's branches all over the place you can explore. And so every conversation there has one major branching point, where the conversation can go in one direction or another before sort of coming back to the same spot, which is just, it's a fun sort of narrative design element to mirror what's happening in the larger metaphor.
We definitely took that in mind when we were creating the structures for the conversations in each mode too, so that they're we did write the conversations differently, not just to kind of intersect with the mechanics, but to also have a certain thrust or structure that is complementary to the kind of mode of movement and the other flow of the game. Because, one of the things that people complimented the First Drive about a lot is how while it's doing all of these things to kind of sell this experience of driving alone late at night, it's also a metaphor for so many other things, including like how narrative works in games in general, writ large. And, you know, we wanted to make sure that that kind of reading would carry through in other modes, but also just, you know, going back to how this thing actually works. So much of it is creating layers with, you know, valid interpretations. You know, like a player could take it in that direction, and then just leaving enough in there that's intentional to give evidence, and then the rest leave it vague, or, you know, have symbols that kind of gesture in that direction, but maybe don't say something clearly. And then that's all that people need in order to feel kind of that their metaphorical reading is validated. And in a lot of respects, all we're trying to do is provide people with a space to reflect and to validate that process. It's an important process.
Yeah. I guess I'm interested in the meta design of being on a train, being in a car, and being on a walk, just because there's such a difference in, like you said, like the safety of the train car. There's definitely like part of the edge that is inherent to the original First Drive Glitch Hikers is that because you're in a car, there's a level of like consensuality to what you are doing. Like, you have to be hurtling your body at 60 miles, I guess, 80 kilometers an hour on a highway? 100? 100? How big do numbers get?
100.
Yeah, 100 kilometers an hour. You have to drive on the right side of the road, or else, you know, bad things happen. There's danger to it, you know? And then when you get to the train, that's taken away. You don't have to worry about any of that. Instead, you're you know, with strangers, and you have to share that space, and that's kind of the limit to the consensuality of the space, is that you have to share this space with people you don't know, and multiple people you don't know. You don't get that luxury of the privacy that is being invaded by a glitch hiker. And then I would figure on a walk, you know, you're just born to the elements. That's whatever happens when you're on a walk.
Yeah, well,
and there is a more in-baked like hostility to meeting someone in a park at night.
Yeah.
Right? Like, there is not that act of trust of, yeah, I'll give you a ride. Like, if you meet someone at night in a park, there is this 5 seconds where you're like, are they gonna stab me?
Yeah, you're fight or flight. No, that's valid.
Is this going to turn sour?
And you can in the park, just like every, you know, each mode has their own mechanics for everything. Each mode has their own mechanics for how sort of music functions. And in the park, you're listening to an MP3 player that you can pause or unpause as you go. And actually, if you want to actively talk to someone in the park, you have to pause your MP3 player, because you can't hear them over your headphones. So you have to pause the music or the podcast that you're listening to and just hear the sounds of nature around you in order to have that conversation. And so it becomes then also a very active thing. You choose if you want to speak to that person, and you have to, you know, go through these steps in order to do so. If you want to, you can just walk on past.
Yeah, the park in Glitch Hikers is a magical fantasy place where nobody tries to talk to you when you've got headphones in, and no one will ever stab you.
Hey, what a magical circle.
Exactly.
You know, I actually wanted to talk, like, break it back a little bit from the big metaphors and ask something a bit more game design related, because you guys have been answering all the questions that we had ready to go before we asked them, because you're all very thoughtful people. But you mentioned one of the things that I thought a lot about the original First Drive. You mentioned there is no moment in which the person gets in your car, and there is no moment when they leave. They just kind of appear next to you, and when you reach the point where the conversation ends, they just disappear. And that brings it this sense of, like, unreality. And obviously the game is built around this vaguely ethereal feeling. I think it communicates that very well. But for example, I always thought, well, it's like a low resources game. They didn't want to animate models getting in and out. And that makes me wonder, like, how, when you are making something that's supposed to inhabit this sort of unreal feeling, how do you balance what some people will assume is just common sense and what other people will take as just actually selling that feeling of unreality?
It's a really interesting question. There are certainly things that we do because of scope reasons and whatnot as well. But I think ultimately for us, it kind of comes down to the idea that there is no wrong way to experience glitch hikers. Like, whatever your interpretation of what is happening is valid. And so, if you're interpreting that as, oh, that's a weird thing, we are in this space of unreality, versus if you're interpreting that as, oh, they just didn't want to animate that, which is very fair. We did definitely back then, we didn't have those resources. Those are both valid readings. And ultimately, we do so many different things. Claris is talking about sort of the complexity of the systems, which to some extent is just, we're doing a lot of stuff at once that may or may not connect to each other, but ultimately creates a much richer sort of tapestry of what's happening. You might not interpret them teleporting into the car or appearing in the car or you hallucinating them in the car or whatever it is in the same way as whether, what we intended or how other people might have interpreted it. But also, it's an alien. So we're still in the realm of unreality in some sense, right? Like, we have all these different ways. The radio DJ sounds like he's talking directly to you at times. We have all of these different things that are there's, one of the things that we've looked at being like, oh, this is really interesting that I don't know that anyone has ever really commented on, is on the highway, there are no exits until the end, at least. And there is no other direction. There's no highway going the other direction that you can see.
There's no contraflow traffic at all.
Right. Which, like, I don't know that a lot of people sort of notice, but it's, again, one of those things that's like, takes you into this realm.
Yeah, well, I think we wanted, even from the first drive, we wanted this sense of, like, you have this power at your command, right? But it is a considerable power, and you have to be kind of conscious in how you wield it. And of course, this power is a hunk of aluminum and steel and plastic with small explosions and a giant engine block hurtling through space, with the help of aerodynamics.
Oh, yeah, I've listened to the works of White Zombie. Yeah, I would agree.
And so it's like, we're familiar with this experience, but that danger that you brought up earlier is like present in our mind because we understand that this is the tool that you have to respect, that you have to have command over, that you're expected to kind of be the responsible wielder of. And that idea of, like, wielding, like, mundane but considerable power that also could take on a spiritual or metaphysical reading is, like, to some extent kind of the glue that holds the whole experience together. And thinking about how people approach those different types of power and the different kinds of contracts that go along with that power. What is the contract? How do you appropriately wield a commuter train as a passenger? Well, maybe by not being a jerk and by being considerate. I don't know, but, like, and it really also just depends on the player. I hope that somebody plays our game and has never been on a commuter train and like, wow, what a strange way to travel. So, like, we have no way of knowing precisely where somebody is going to be coming to the game. So there's a certain amount of uncertainty and doubt we have to have about all of our assumptions about the kinds of players that we're going to have, especially because we want to cast a wider net and be more accessible and be more approachable than other games, perhaps. But I think beyond just having that uncertainty about who is playing the game, what kind of mindset they're approaching the game in, and having a bunch of options and ability to accommodate them, that those gaps in the narrative, those spaces where you have to fill it with logic or a story or, as you were saying, common sense, like those gaps are precisely where the narrative of the game lives. That's where the player is kind of injecting their own personality and their own unique spin on things. And how you get a player to accept this kind of stop motion, shutter stop, like, aesthetic to a story where there's gaps all over the place. There's a real alchemy to it, and it's hard to describe, and I'm not sure if I fully understand it. I think I'm still learning about it as we've gone through this process, and as we see how the game is received, as more people play it, I think we'll be learning more still. But it definitely comes down to having an element of weirdness, letting players know that, hey, there is going to be this weirdness. You should be on your toes. Gets them engaged, shakes them out of their comfort zone. And then a whole bunch of other things cascading together hopefully keeps the player where these gaps feel playful and inviting as opposed to confusing and bewildering. And when that happens, then your player's hooked in, and they're an active participant in the storytelling, and whatever happens is absolutely valid. Yeah.
I am just flawed every time we get an answer, because it's like, yeah, you're all very thoughtful people. I am not surprised that you've managed to make like such a unique experience with your game.
Nah, that's what I remember from old Glitch Hikers. Just at the end of the day, what it comes down to is, how do you grab the player? Which is the same question any game asks. So there's just something so like you enter the strange and bizarre within Glitch Hikers, but it does come around to building in a way that is familiar, you know, to people who've played games and to people who haven't. It just works in both directions in such a nice way.
One of my favorite things with First Drive was seeing people do Let's Plays and going in completely blind and being like, oh, a game about driving, cool. And then, you know, being unable to control the car very much and being like, okay, this is interesting and weird. And then, you know, having these conversations and being like, okay, what's going on here? And by the end of the game, I've gone like, wow, I did not know what to expect, but that was, you know, very meaningful. Always fun to see that, like, yeah, how do people come into it versus, you know, how do they experience it at the end?
Nice quick little question. I know that much of the video game choo-choo audience is thinking this immediately. You said there was 50 different, I guess, Glitch Hikers? Or
there are
50 different
There
routes?
are 50 different conversations that you can have with hikers. So there are 16 unique hikers, characters that you will encounter on the journeys. And then each one appears in multiple journeys between 2 and 4 of them. So you will encounter the same character in multiple places, having a different conversation in each one. So the math works out to 50 total. And some of them are,
nice.
You know, you'll meet a character in multiple places and they'll have sort of, you know, similar kinds of conversations. There's, you know, particular topics or ideas that each hiker is particularly interested in. And then some actually have almost like character arcs across those 3 conversations. Some you sort of have to have in a particular order, some you don't. So there's sort of a lot going on there. But yes, there's a lot to discover.
Okay. The important part of this question, though, that we need answered is, how many of them are just a little guy?
There is at least one just a little guy. I think you could.
Good. That's a good start.
I think you could you know, say that about several of them, probably.
Yes. Okay. That's cool. That's cool.
I have another easygoing question. You know, when you think about like strange and the supernatural in a way, there's like 2 realms I would say most people divide it in. You have like aliens and sci-fi weird stuff, and you have like ghosts and witches and stuff. And obviously Glitch Hikers is like a mix of both, but which side would you say it leans more towards to?
That's an interesting question. We play with a lot of weird that you might consider more on sort of the, fantasy, almost horror kind of stuff, but ultimately probably more on the sci-fi side of things. Partially I say that because one of the things that we do in Glitch Hikers, one of my favorite things about writing a Glitch Hikers conversation, which was true of the original and very true of the Spaces Between, is finding like that one weird fact that you can create a metaphor around. Something about, there's a character in the original that talks about, elements of historical, ancient religions and mythology and stuff. And, here's, this particular thing. And how does that, how do we interpret that these days? And how do we learn something from that? And so we really find these, often scientific facts, because, it relates back to this idea of the cosmic sublime. You look up at the stars and how does that make you feel? A point that we always come back to is a Carl Sagan quote about how life is the universe's way of knowing itself. And so these themes are so prevalent throughout all of the writing and all of the design, I think, that, we have these lots of cool little scientific facts and interesting things in there that give it that tone, I would say.
Well, I'm just food for thought, just thinking through a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, it takes a while to digest, doesn't it? It's like very, very good answers all throughout.
Well, one thing I would love to loop back and kind of answer a little bit more fully is Walker's earlier question about, how do you make these architectures? How do you approach them? Because, first of all, the answer is you think about all the stuff that we just said. and you make that game. That's the important game to make. And you don't want to stray far from those goals and get too in the weeds, focusing on what you think you're making instead of making a video game that's doing those things with those ideas and places and metaphors.
Yeah.
And so that's one thing that's... if I'm not making sense, I think I'll just say, it's easy when you're making digital spaces to get deeply consumed in the act of rendering as if real that space. When the reality of that space is probably not even actually the point of the experience. Maybe even if it is, and you go through all the rigmaroles, lovingly, painstakingly create, this jungle landscape. Most players are going to run through it at a breakneck pace, and their brain is just going to go, yep, that checks out. That's a deeply complicated rainforest with thousands of species. Cool, good, moving on.
Yep.
And so you have to recognize how people actually perceive space, which is to say there's a lot of different senses going on, and those senses aren't perceiving the whole, but a whole bunch of different parts. And then the experience of being in the space is the sum total of all those parts. And so, again, thinking about how do you make a space out of music? How do you make a space out of just reverb and room tone and a few bits of foliage falling around in the park? Both of those things, both together and separately, also are part of the total ingredients to create, our park, for example. And so partly that's what's making it so strange and fantastical, is it's got all of these things kind of chiming in and out, emerging, shuffling, having meaning kind of cascade and resonate across. But it's more than just a whole bunch of stuff happening. It's also really thinking about every aspect of this experience, every aspect of this space is holding space for the player, is kind of wrapping around them in a way. So it's not just about confronting them with a rendered simulated reality that checks out and is convincing. In fact, if anything, we want people to be like, wait a second, that doesn't check out. I want to examine that further. We want to kind of draw them in.
Mm-hmm.
But what we do want them to do is relax into the space and into the mood. And so a lot of what's happening isn't just the architecture that you see or the structures that you think about and that we talk about, but how the music, the sound, the lighting, all of these small, subtle things also congeal around each of these different journeys.
Right. No, I see this a lot actually throughout Lucas's writing on a lot of characters, is that the characters will be written in a way where their minds will start to wander before suddenly making a connection. And it really vibes with how I read, and I'll be reading and my mind will start to wander. And then suddenly I'll like zone in on something. It might be something completely different from what the conversation is, but there's just so many things to like make connections on around that somewhere in between you connect these dots and something connects with something else. And like there's a flow to it, and it comes through in the writing, and it comes through in the characters, like the ways that they'll talk in spaces. It's really neat.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, and a lot of the writing was, collaborative between me and Claris also.
Sure, of course.
But yeah, I mean, it's that sort of wandering aspect to it was really key to, I mean, the core concept, even back in the original, which is the late night aspect of it, right? Like, it's the kind of conversation that you have when it's 3 a.m. and you are tired, and you're with your friends that you've known for, a decade or whatever, and you're just rambling about something, and then, you find some interesting kernel there, or you get into your feelings about it, or, whatever it is. And so, like I was saying before, that's sort of a big part of writing them and finding those metaphors that you can come back to, where you can say, hey, let's talk about this, but then like, how does that make us feel at the end of the day?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah, and that actually reminds me of the answer about the architecture does actually, to me, reflect the writing in a way, right? Like, it's not about perfectly replicating the mountain. It's about the connection of the mountain and the room team and the colors and the view from inside the car that congeals in this space. And that sort of made me think of what you guys told us about the meaning that one can derive from the game, right? Because ultimately, even if someone can interpret anything they want from the contents of the game, there is a certain amount of curation and deliberacy in what actually gets put into this space that they can then extract meaning from, right?
Absolutely. And that's something that we've talked about, about the kinds of writing that we would do, and this idea of creating trying to create a universal experience, right? Anyone could come to this, and whether they know games or not, whether they're, whatever background they're from, and hopefully find something in the game. And every dialogue choice you have, we want to make sure that there's, a range of possible responses. How do you take what the hiker has said? How do you, what are your values? But at the same time, I mean, it is curated, right? Like, we have characters who are explicitly queer, for instance, and we don't give you the dialogue option to be a dick to them. We don't let you be a homophobe. Because that's not what we want to make. But there are some characters where you can, maybe ask questions. We have a character who is a wheelchair user in the game, who we had a lot of great consulting on from a consultant named Ace Tilton Ratcliffe, who was amazing. And that character does, talk about the experience of being disabled. And, there are some dialogue options that you can say that the character sort of gets a bit, justifiably upset about. Like, why would what I'm trying to tell you is that's, not the case, or whatever. So that we can also hold space for people to, if they don't have experience with disabled folks, for instance, to have a bit of a learning experience, but in a very sort of real conversational way, not like let me lecture at you for 10 minutes about how to not be a dick or whatever.
And also, oh, sorry, I was just going to say, like, and also always making sure that there's enough connection and looseness, even when we're talking about specific lived experiences, to where, both the hikers themselves are trying to have that Me Too, like, early meeting a stranger in a public setting. You're trying to find those points of commonality. So there's that going on, but I think also just trying to make sure that everything is loose enough to where, even when we're being specific, there's room for the player to kind of project themselves and their experiences into any dynamic, and I think that's also important.
And sorry, go ahead.
And go ahead.
We do this all the time.
Oh, please.
And that's also one of the things that we do is bring it back to the weird and the surreal too. Not trying to get too deep into something that's a little like too real. The character who's talking about being disabled and what that's like here on Earth is comparing it to when they were on another planet, and how that planet dealt with disability, and then also the art that they were creating and the things that they were trying to do with that art, and so this character is about being disabled. There's a much more, richness to the character's story, but also and also you're talking about being like on another planet and doing things, right? What's up with that? And so there's like all of these different pieces that a player can, be drawn to, or take something from over the course of these conversations. It's never sort of just one thing. Just like every element of the game, right? The music and the spaces and all these things that we've been talking about. There's lots that you can try to connect to, or that the game can try to connect with you. So that, even if one particular thing doesn't resonate with you, there's lots of other things that might.
And almost everything in the game is a launching point, a place to start. And almost everything ends with kind of a ... And there's the expectation, and we very explicitly give the space and time to players to have those moments afterwards to process, after a journey, after a conversation. We're really pleased with how much people took the writing that we produced for the first drive and ran with it, and how much it was as provocative in a productive way as we had hoped. That was really nice to see, and it encouraged us to continue to do that and to really have the expectation that each conversation is this kind of springboard, and we can let the player take that and run with it and carry that baggage into subsequent conversations in a way that the conversation might not, or it might uncannily refer to exactly what you were just thinking. Holy crap. Whoa, how did that happen? Well, lots of ways. But in addition to that, even if the next conversation isn't about that, we recognize that the player is still carrying that baggage, those thoughts with them. It's kind of the snowball or this katamari that builds up, and something that we were really happy to be able to spend a lot of time doing for the Spaces Between was working with consultants on, the mental health side, working with an organization like Take This. And also creating those spaces like the convenience store to not only be this functional nexus for you to navigate the experience, but also additional padding. So that, when you are shooting your thoughts out there and now your mind is racing and you're thinking about a whole bunch of heavy things, and the fact that it's all a bit unreal and fantastical isn't keeping you grounded, there's other parts of the game. There's other spaces. There's moments held for you to be out there, to be brought back gently. And there are characters where you can say, hey, I'm having a hard time. Actually, that was really difficult for me. Can I talk about it? And that was something really important because we were experimenting. We're still experimenting. There's a mode that we're still not talking about yet, but it's as experimental, at least, as the first drive was back 7 years ago. But as much as we're experimenting, we realized that we are, with the first drive, playing with powerful forces and asking people to kind of enter into mindsets that are potentially very vulnerable and meaningful to them. That's a good thing, but there's risk that's involved with that. And to really take time to create more space, safety mechanisms, etc. for players so that they can go into it with more confidence that the game is going to catch them. That was something really important to us, and we're really looking forward to hearing from players how we did.
That's something you can really, it's something special that you can do in a game that you can't really in other scenarios and styles of performative media, just because you're spending so much time with it and you're spending time with, designers who have made experiences for you to interact with. That gets me very excited that there is more to come down the line that's way beyond what we've seen so far in demos and in previews. I wanted to get to, we've talked a lot about how things have changed, but there's also some things that have really stayed the same. And I have, maybe this is a weird question, maybe this doesn't make sense, but for the hiker heads out there, I've noticed that some of the characters that you get to talk to, some of the hikers are similar to ones from the first drive. And I was just wondering, are they the same people?
Absolutely. So every hiker that you could encounter in the first drive has been lovingly recreated and given a wonderful update for the spaces between.
Okay.
In fact, all of the with some, again, sort of edits and updates, all of the conversations that you could have in first drive are also in the spaces between in the drive journey. So we're sort of, you can go back and play the first drive now if you want. It's, a wonderful experience, and we encourage that. But that experience sort of also lives within the spaces between. We wanted to, ultimately make the spaces between sort of the full canonical experience with everything within it. So all of those characters, yes, are still here. And because we now have multiple journeys, you can now meet them in other places as well and have further conversations with them and get to know those characters a little bit more.
Wow, that was entirely way more straightforward than I was expecting. I was expecting like, oh, maybe, maybe those are canonically. No, that's cool. That's really cool. It also brings me to the other part of this that I wanted to talk about, because we've talked about what it takes to build up these spaces, but we haven't really directly talked about, the labor, the last 7 years of work that have gone into this. Speaking of people who have stayed the same, you've got some of the same voice actors, and now with much broader job titles than before.
Yeah, so every main person who worked on First Drive has also worked on this game. So obviously Claris and me. Our technical director, Phil, also has gone as Samelazine, was our programmer and actually artist on the First Drive.
Yeah, where's Phil?
Where is Phil?
Where is he?
He's around.
Shall we? Hey, Phil, come on! You don't want to talk to you. You don't want to talk to Solon? Come on.
we're in like the last 2 weeks of production on this game right now, so Phil's a little busy.
Oh, I know.
But
you're about done with the game?
Yes, we're almost done making it, which is exciting. But the composer on the original is our main composer for all of the spaces between, and let me tell you, there are hours of music in this game that we are very excited about.
Oh my god, so much music.
So much music. And then you mentioned the voice actors. Yeah, so Jacob Burgess was our voice actor for the first drive, the voice of the radio.
I had to look back at the credits. I'm like, oh, that was Jacob 7 years ago also.
I know,
baby.
I know. So he did the voice of the radio. So he's back to do the voice of the radio and all of the, just because we wanted all of the original content in the new game as well. So he's redone all of the original lines, but there's lots more voice of the radio to be heard on the drive, so that you get, a little bit different stuff every time you replay it, which has been very exciting. And he just absolutely killed it, coming back to reprise the role with the new writing that we had done. Just was right back in it, knew exactly the tone. So we absolutely love Jacob, and he's done a lot of casting and directing as well. So he was our caster and voiceover director on the project to work with our other voice actors. We have basically one voice actor per journey to give it that different tone.
Mm.
Yeah, that's what got me really excited was just fast forwarding to Jacob's a voice actor and voice caster for tons of stuff now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
it's really, really cool to see.
Yeah.
Well, and we specifically our announcement trailer that we put out a couple months ago. We also very specifically kind of orchestrated for people like you, Solon, who knew Glitch Hikers, to watch. And we start with a different voice actor, and we start with some of the terrain, and then we cut to the drive, and there's Jacob's voice. You're listening to Radio 90 Night Drive, and it was that. I'm sitting here as we release the trailer, going like, I can't wait for people to see that moment and go, oh holy shit, more Glitch Hikers.
Yeah. Yep. No, that was a moment for me, because I don't know. It's Walker. You actually might be able to help answer this question, because when I look at Glitch Hikers, it comes at me in waves of like nostalgia for a time that maybe never existed or maybe did 7 years ago, and but you come at it from a more recent point of view in some ways.
Well, I mean, not really. I did play in like 2014 when it was like getting like the initial press coverage.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's more or less where I start looking at like beyond IGN and Eurogamer, and I start looking into like games coverage, and like that's more or less where I start getting involved with this stuff. So I've been like an original fan, if you would say. But it does
That's amazing.
Put things into context. I was like how old am I? Like 25, so I was like 17 when it came out.
Yep.
And it is a little bit strange to see the game now that I'm used to driving, now that like a lot of these conversations are less musings and more real subjects that I have to grapple in my life.
Sure.
Like I actually did start to notice the importance of that accessibility filter that you have, turning off certain subjects that might be too heavy, because like there were a couple of segments I saw in the trend that I was like, oh shit, that's like a thing that happens. Like I've seen it happen.
Mm-hmm.
There's tons of those filters in there, and I almost I want to also play with it. I love the idea that they're just filters to change how conversations play out, and so you can filter them for things if you don't want to. If you are not ready to have those kinds of conversations, you can change them on the fly anytime. It's really cool how that's set up, but also I want to just play with them to like try to metagame and force conversations, or like I cut out this and this and then see if I can make a different conversation happen. I almost wonder if there could be more filters for like just nice things, like, oh, you don't want to have happy conversations, filter those out.
Do you want to find the right filters to do like a Glitch Hiker speed run?
It's interesting, like those kinds of additional filters and stuff like that. That kind of functionality is something that we were talking about from like the prototype of the Spaces Between when we first started working on the game, which like was honestly a couple of years ago is when we really started like dusting off the project and being like, okay, yeah. And one of the interesting things is that despite, we haven't been working on it this whole time, I think everyone who was involved in the first drive has been thinking about these things and has gotten a lot out of looking back at this project and that time in our careers and thought, what have we learned since then? And what did we think we knew back then that actually turned out to be true? And so I think that's been an interesting process for all of us to kind of reflect on, in some cases, our entire careers.
Mm-hmm.
And to really think about, what made things work the first time around.
And I wanted to touch on those filters as well, because they're there so that you can, again, customize your experience, right? And it's not necessarily a case of I can't have any reference to that because I just can't deal with that ever. But it might just be, I had a really bad day. I don't want to have a conversation about death right now. So I'm just going to turn that off and not have to worry about that. But, next time I'll play, I'll turn it back on potentially. We wanted to allow that customization so that you could come into it and feel like you're going to have the experience that you want to have. But also it's not like we are depicting death. We're having real down-to-earth conversations about grief and dealing with grief and things like that. And so, it's the kind of thing that, if you are personally dealing with, loss, for instance, it might be the kind of thing that you actually want to have that conversation, right? Because it is an opportunity to, talk through your feelings or have somebody else sort of talk through those feelings with you. And so, we really want to encourage folks to come into the game with sort of this idea of what they might experience, knowing that it's not, we're not going to suddenly jump scare you or something, right? We're not showing you graphic depictions of things. We're just having conversations about these sort of very deep and very real subjects. If you don't want to deal with that today because you had a bad day at work or this is still too real for you or something like that, you can turn it off. You can, make sure that you have that safety for yourself. Or if you find yourself in the middle of a conversation that you don't want to be having in the middle of the game, you can back out of a conversation at any time with no repercussions. So we wanted to sort of add these things in, but also allow it to be something that maybe you do come in and you do want to have that kind of conversation.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting, like earlier on when we were talking about the kind of nature of the car, we were talking about the consensuality at play there of letting someone in your car, and the ways we associate kind of being in control of a vehicle with being in control of that space, being the boss of your little bubble world there. And I think giving a lot of options both outside the kind of flow of the game and in the heat of the moment to be able to direct conversations away from things that are difficult is part of maintaining that consensuality with players who don't know what they're going to expect, right? At the same time, I know we want to talk more about this at a later date when the game is a little bit closer to release, but we thought a lot about this content filtering and how we want to approach difficult conversations because, a lot of the stuff we talk about is real shit, and we're trying to put truth, real lived experiences or things that we've seen, the real dynamics that are at play at some really difficult parts of being alive and existing in this universe and on this planet. And we want to share that knowledge, and as Lucas was saying, sometimes when those things are really hard is precisely when you need those conversations. So giving people a lot of ability to tailor their experience and respond in the moment was important, but also not doing things, not presenting this in a way where people are asked immediately and upfront to deselect because that might be a problem in the future, right? And I think one thing that's a little misguided in some of the discussions that we have about difficult content in games is this notion that you should be able to remove it even when it's integral to the experience. I mean, the Glitchhiker's experience is one of introspection and consensuality and holding space for you. So in the case of our game, it's very important that you be able to have a lot of authorship over what kind of content you're going to encounter and be able to get out of it. But for some games, confronting that is the entirety of the narrative arc and the entire point, and it's important for games to be able to explore those things and to be able to tell those stories. Those are really important stories. And so we wanted to explore things that are very specific to this game, like the content filters that we don't necessarily think, are applicable to a lot of other games. And then we also wanted to think of smaller courtesies in the moment to players, letting them, skip past conversations at any time, letting it kind of ellipses forward and not breaking their sequence flow of the game, or penalizing them for not being able to kind of handle a small bit of larger game. Like, those are things that we definitely want to continue forward. And I think it's been a really interesting process to consider a lot of this stuff deeply because, as I've said before, creating a safer space for players and really keeping an open mind about the different perspectives and mindsets that people could be approaching our game with is really important, and something that we really put a lot of thought into.
I can tell it's a big part of you're going to be talking a lot about this filter with pretty much everyone, because I think it's something that it shows how much effort has gone into it. And from my perspective, because of a lot of the other narrative based games I've played where they have you just self-select out, you just opt out immediately out of something that might be coming farther ahead. It's not an easy answer to answer right in the moment when you get the prompt, like, 2 chapters before something hits and you're like, what are you talking about? Oh, sometimes some of the better visual novels I'll see use that to set up, like, hey, here comes the drama section. And that's cool too. But yeah, people are going to be talking a lot about this specific thing because it comes back to Silverstring's experience with architecture in narratives. Because you had to build that from day one in order to get a selective style where players can understand that they can select in and out and filter things into directions where they are not necessarily comfortable. It doesn't like put, bubble wrap over everything. It puts them in places where they can navigate what kinds of experiences they want without having to feel like they're losing anything. And so
absolutely.
That from an architectural viewpoint, that is fascinating.
Well, and one of the big things that we wanted to do within sort of this dichotomy as well is, the game is all about conversations, and so we also wanted to try to model good conversational behavior. And so, we have, certainly you can use a filter to stop things. If you're in the middle of a conversation and you're like, nope, I can't do this, you can back out. But even when you back out of a conversation in the middle of it, it doesn't just end immediately. There is a line of dialogue where you say, I don't think I can have this conversation right now. And the hiker that you're talking to responds, and each hiker has a bit of a different response. But, the idea is generally sort of like, oh yeah, no problem, I totally get it. Sorry for dumping that on you or whatever. But then also a couple of the characters that have these harder conversations, especially, there's one that was in the original game that, I think we might have handled better and we have tried to handle differently, while still sort of keeping the core of it in the spaces between, where instead of just sort of dumping on you as the player and jumping into, potentially fraught waters, she comes into the car and says like, hey, I'm dealing with a lot of dark thoughts right now. Are you okay to talk about that? And you have the opportunity to say like, yes, or I'm also dealing with dark thoughts, but yes, let's talk about it. Or you can say, I'm not actually in a place to do that right now. And she says, okay, I totally get it. And that's sort of the end of the conversation. But sort of this idea of, that's how we as people should be dealing with each other too, right? You don't just go to your friend and start dumping on them because you've had a hard day. Like, you don't know where they're at. You don't know if they can deal with that right now. Or, the idea of somebody, is complaining to you about something, asking, what do you want from me out of this? What do you need from me? Are you looking for just someone to talk to, or are you looking for solutions? Like, because different people are going to have different ideas of what that looks like. So we're trying to sort of help model those ideas as well.
And
I've definitely been in that space 100 times. Folks, want to ask up front, like, hey, I'm in I'm in a spot. Can you listen? Can you be an ear for me? And it's like, yeah.
Totally.
I'm totally ready now.
And, as much work and thought went into some of the deeper menu systems, like the content filtering, the stuff that we put up front, unmissable, every single player encounters this, every single player has this option, every single player gets this, courtesy. Hey, I'm going to talk about some real shit before I dump on you. You can opt into this. Those ended up being much more important, meaningful, and mechanically and narratively aligned with our game answers to this kind of content warning, content filter problem, quote unquote, that games, and to some case, because of how they're received, queer games especially, struggle with, is those solutions are fine and all, but those are kind of here's your bulletproof vest. Rule number 1 in don't get shot is don't get shot. Just avoid bullets. If you fail to avoid the bullets, then here's your bulletproof vest. And in this case, it's hi, even if you neglected all of our warnings, even if you blasted through or hey, this game is going to talk about real shit, message from the devs at the start, even if you'd never look at the content filtering, some of the more difficult conversations are still going to start with a, hey, heads up, courtesy, here's your chance to opt out. Because it just makes sense. No matter what other systems we have at play, it just worked better.
That's awesome. Yeah, just more tools.
More tools.
That's so fascinating that between the first Glitch Hikers leading the way for a lot of folks, for a lot of people in its narrative, and just how you can just put somebody into a space. You just put them there. That's where they go. And now, the new Glitch Hikers being something more about, hey, you can put them in a space. You can also help guide them through the space in a lot of different ways. And you can put them into places and headspaces where they can self-filter in and out of conversations that they are interested in or disinterested in. That's some incredibly powerful tools.
I mean, it's been extremely fortunate that we have such a talented team working on this. It hasn't just been Lucas and I. And I think it's also been, I don't want to go so far as to say fortunate, but, perhaps well-timed that all of these brilliant people have been trapped in their homes. And so we've had a lot of time to focus very intensely on these questions. And I think everyone's been thinking about self-care and how do you sit with discomfort? How do you sit with extremely complicated, terrifying things that are fundamentally related to the ins and outs of being a body on this planet? How do you do that when you can't just run away from those problems or self-soothe by just going to the movies when you are just still in that space? And consequently, still in that headspace, what do you do? How do you sit with that discomfort? I mean, that's been the challenge du jour every day for months. And so, to some extent, it's that resonance and that connection back to the game we're making. It's been a helpful environment insofar as it keeps me focused on the stuff we're supposed to be thinking about. I don't know if it's necessarily the best or most fortunate, but it's a connection that I think is worth making and talking about just briefly.
Yeah. If it's all right, do you mind expanding on that a little more about how development during the pandemic has been for you all, for Glitch Hikers, especially because I know that Silver String's such a project-oriented thing that when projects start, moving around radically like they did last year, I'm sure for y'all, that it changes kind of how things went for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a very strange time for us because, we started ramping up as the world was ramping down, so to speak. We brought Phil back onto the team the month before lockdown started. And since then, we have grown to, 7 folks plus a bunch of contractors that we're working with who are amazing. And that's largely due to, we've Glitchhiker's Spaces Between has been largely funded by the Canada Media Fund, as well as a few other funding folks and certainly help from Fellow Traveler. And so we've had the immense privilege to be able to, offer folks work in this terrible time when a lot of people were hurting for that. And so that's been surreal in its own way for sure as well. We're doing really well and we're making this dream game and whatnot during this time period, which is I think helped. I mean, I don't know what life would have been like without this the last couple of years. It's helped, certainly keep us busy and keep us fed and all of that kind of stuff. And the timing worked out well also because, like you say, other projects move around and things get delayed and, we haven't been doing as much consulting work in the last few months, certainly. And ultimately that's been okay because we've had Glitch Hikers to focus on, taking up basically all of our time anyway. So that's, it's been a weird and wondrous thing. I mean, we have a very remote team. We haven't ever met in person a couple of the folks that we're working with because we hired them in the middle of a pandemic. And that's been interesting, but we've always been a sort of remote studio. That's always been part of the plan, and so it just really forced us to figure out what that looks like. And then meanwhile, it certainly did affect the content of the game. I mean, there's a few conversations I remember writing that were just like, oh, okay, well, this is just a conversation about COVID now. Not explicitly, but it's definitely in there.
There's feelings of isolation or lockdown or even I won't get into specifics. I don't need to push you in that direction, but that's fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, there's certainly, at least for me, I don't know how everybody else feels about this, but just speaking for myself, there's something almost Promethean about this project. First of all, I hope I have grown and matured and learned better coping mechanisms and better life skills in the years from the first drive to now, from 2014 to now as an adult. So I would like to think that there's at least some stuff that I could pass on, even before things got interesting at the start of 2020 with the lockdowns. There were life skills that I could pass on that were, new from when I worked on the first drive. But when the lockdown happened and when everyone was kind of thrown into this weird, liminal, strange, shared universal experience that was also deeply personal for each one of us, I think it became just personally, projects aside, I better not forget how to take care of myself because if we're locked in here for over a year, she thought, thinking worst case scenario, then, if I forget how to take care of myself, then it's going to be really easy to languish. And I think, for everyone, that's been the case. It has been a war of attrition on my best habits and my best, sense of keeping a good care of myself. Just the day in, day out sameness of COVID and the pandemic.
Yep.
And I think that this game has been a rallying call for me to keep thinking what worked back then, what works now. What sort of compassion would you want extended to yourself having failed to, wake up and do your stretching like you're supposed to or whatever. So yeah, I think that there's that connection too.
Yeah, no, it's interesting we're a lot older than we were 7 years ago.
Turns out.
In that way, it turns out that's how that works. I've been seeing it the same way where, we're getting older and now it's people are looking up to us as trying to figure out, because a lot of folks are trying to get their sea legs in some way or another, and maybe in a new field, or maybe in the same field they've been in for a long time, or maybe just in life, just figuring out how to get their sea legs again, living and doing laundry regularly, those kinds of things. You know, it can be in any kind of thing, but they're like looking to me, and I was like, I guess, yeah, I'm 30-ish. Yeah, I guess you look to me now, huh? And I, you know, got to be that person to be like, all right, this is how you do laundry. I got you. You gotta wash. You're gonna wash those colors all together. Wash with the whites. I don't care. But just turn your graphic tees inside out. It'll make them last so much longer.
Yeah.
Oh,
Life
doesn't it?
tips.
I don't know.
Actually, on the topic of the workflow, I actually was curious because obviously this is a much more labor-intensive project than the original Glitch Hikers was.
Yeah.
How much does adding sections that don't take place inside a vehicle add to your like work pipeline? Because you have the park, which is walking around, and the airport is also not in an enclosed, tight vehicle space. Like, how much of a challenge is that technically?
I mean, in some cases, it was like making 4 different games.
It really was. It really was. Every one of them, you know, we've talked about how they're all different mechanically, and of course, like, how did we decide that was a good idea? Because it is making 4 different games. So, you know, each of them we had to approach, you know, in their own way, and what made most sense for that, you know, the design experience we're trying to create, and then also, you know, this is our. I mean, we've been growing as a studio. We have an actual team now, so this was our first real like project where we had to really look at, you know, scope and timeline and budget and go, okay, but what can we actually accomplish in the time that we have, and you know, how do we come up with design solutions that will make this, you know, easier for us, or, you know, possible for us, and things like that. So I mean, it was a whole ordeal for sure.
That's such a hard question to even answer or approach when you're in pandemic, though, too, where time feels like it's forever.
Yeah, I mean, you know, like I say, because we had, you know, specific funding, mostly from the Canon Media Fund, and, you know, then schedules and budgets and stuff as a result. Lots of things, you know, changed over the course of the project, but we knew that we had. You know, we had deadlines, we had bars we had to reach, that kind of stuff. So we at least had that grounding. I think we couldn't just make this forever. I mean, we, you know, with the resources, we absolutely could make Glitch Hikers forever. And I'm almost glad that, you know, that's not a possibility, because it forces us to, you know, actually put something out into the world and you know, make the decisions that we need to make it as tight and good an experience as we can. So, you know, it's been something that just keeps driving us forward. And like I said, we're coming close to the finish line on that one, which is fun.
Close to the finish line. Amazing.
Yeah.
Though I will just like piggyback off of that and say that, like, for the folks listening at home, like, I mean, we love this game. We love these ideas. They're continue to be a dynamo of inspiring ways we could push things further, and we would love to continue to support this game well. So if y'all listening like it, and there's a hunger and a need for more Glitch Hikers, then I think we'll probably be able to rise to the challenge again in the future. I certainly love this game, but it's been a real hoot.
We would certainly revisit, you know, if folks are really digging the new, the spaces between, you know, there's lots more directions we can continue to push it. So go wishlist now on Steam.
Yes, please.
Yeah, that's what is that? bit.ly/G Glitch Hikers, then capital TSB. I think that's if I remember the link.
Yes, I believe that is correct. That'll take you right to the Steam page.
I'm pretty sure we can put that in the post in the website.
Heck yeah.
Also, you can check out glitchhikers.com, which has the link to the Steam page, has our trailer, all of that kind of stuff.
Well, this seems like a perfectly quaint place to end. I don't know how we had managed to reach around that way. Any last thoughts or questions, Walker?
I have one. Do you have any plans for a translation?
Interesting. Great question. Yes. We are planning, if all goes well, to launch with simplified Chinese as well as English. And if things go well once we do launch, we're definitely interested in getting it into more languages. We would absolutely love to translate it into a lot of languages. We'll just have to see what the interest is like. It is about an 85,000 word game, so each additional language that we look at has a cost associated with it. But that's absolutely something that we'd love to do.
And just to elaborate, it's also something that, like, as excited as we are to get it translated, we also want to do it right. We want to pay people a fair rate for their labor, and we want people to take the time to really translate the concepts and cultural mores and concepts that we're talking about that are situated in English in North America, and translate those for the appropriate culture for each language as well, so that it makes sense in its context.
Mm-hmm. Any plans for VR? It kind of has that kind of look and style to it in a way.
You're like the third or fourth person who's asked us that in the last couple of weeks.
I know I am, and I'm asking it for a reason. I know specifically I am.
We've certainly talked about doing VR Glitch Hikers over the last several years, even as we were trying to figure out if there was more Glitch Hikers that we could do. We love VR. We've worked on a number of VR projects, so there is a possibility for sure in the future. I think, like you say, it feels like it fits so well, being able to really immerse yourself in these spaces through VR. So it's something that has been on the table, something that has been discussed. No current plans.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Well, in that case, let's wrap things up here on the Starlight Car. Where can we find y'all, and where would you like us to go to help support Glitch Hikers? We kind of talked about it a little bit, but
yeah, absolutely. You can wishlist Glitch Hikers on Steam. That's definitely one of the sort of best ways to support us. You'll get notified, as soon as the game is released next year, all of that fun stuff. You can follow our Silverstring Twitter account, which is Silverstring without any vowels.
Who needs them?
Yep, it's
which I will spell. Yeah, Silverstring, exactly. SLVRSTRNG on Twitter. We have lots of updates and screenshots and things there that you can see. So lots of great content to follow along with. And if you're really into it, please also check out the Fellow Traveler Discord. We have a channel there where you can come and hang out with other fans of the game, and we'll be doing some fun stuff there, over the coming months as well.
For the real hiker heads.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Thank y'all so much for having us here.
Oh, it's an honor. Thank you for
letting
us host y'all.
Thank you.
Walker, where can we find you, and where can we get more introspective thoughts on tone, sound, and glitch hiking from yourself?
I'm on Twitter at PunkPerfed, and in there's like a link all my dumb music reviews and radio music.
You can find me at ChorbySP. That is my Twitch handle. That is the nom de plume of evil diabolical Twitchdom. That's also where I stream on Twitch. The other things that you should definitely be following, if you're not, you may be one of the first people listening to this right now on Patreon at patreon.com/VGCC. For $3 a month, you can get a lot of our work a week early, including our anime podcast and many other delightful tidbits as we play through games and stuff. And if you like what you heard here, you can follow us at on Twitter at VGChooChoo. That is the place for tweetings. As well as Tumblr at videogamechoochoo.tumblr.com. and come hang out with us on Discord. We're at thegamezone.zone. That's the place where the games are zoned. It's a liminal space all in of its own. Oh, there's some places in there that are quite liminal, exceedingly liminal. But yeah, thank you all for joining us on this edition of the Starlight Car. Hey, y'all, we'll go to the dining car real quick. We'd pop over, get a snack.
Sounds good to me.
Oh,
It's a great way to end your journey.
yeah. Let's all go to the dining car. I'll see you all next time.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.